Hello and welcome back to the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. We're thrilled to have you here today. We have a special episode. Today's episode is going to be a Q&A. We posted on Instagram 2 days ago announcing this and Facebook, collected the questions, and I've also added in some questions that we've received from students at speaking engagements across the Roanoke Valley. So excited to answer these questions. Got some really interesting ones for sure. But I'm just going to jump right into it. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to be able to engage and interact with the people who are the audience of the show and answer anything that they may have. And I feel like there's questions from every episode that get asked, and I just want to try to compile them and do a better job of answering them. So question 1, it says, how do I become unrecognizable? What I think this person is asking is from a change perspective, how do they become something so far from what they currently are that people don't recognize them? Like they see the change and it's a new person. My advice for that, and the way that I kind of approached it, was you have to burn all the bridges. You have to burn all the ships. You can't really bring too much of your old life with you into your new life if you want to create a ton of change or be unrecognizable. For me, the majority of things that I was involved with prior to changing my life all played a part in this negative side of me. And so I had to let all of those things go. It wasn't just drugs or alcohol. It was, financial approaches to my spending. It was how I interacted with people. It was how I treated my friends. It was literally everything. It was where I lived. It was my faith. It was my relationship with my mom. Like all of that had to change. And so for me, I didn't really stop at anything. I just tried to change literally everything. And that was the most effective way. Next question. What is your favorite protein powder on the market? So there's 2, and I'm not sponsored or affiliated with any protein company, but I have to give BPN a shout out, Bear Performance Nutrition. I've been using their protein for about 5 years. I started using it right around the time I got sober, a little bit after, and I've been following Nick Bear for quite some time, and I've got Go One More tattooed on my arm, and so they've been a big part of my life and the things that have happened in my life. So I definitely try to support them. And then the other company would be Noble Origins, grass-fed, basically protein straight from a cow, from nose to tail, use all parts of the cow. There's no fillers or crazy additives. It's as pure as it comes. And so I like it. But if I'm just looking to get a quick protein shake right after a workout, it's probably going to be BPN. If I'm looking to get something more wholesome and honestly filling, I'll lean towards the Noble route. Next question. You meet your 80-year-old self and are allowed to ask one question. What are you asking? My goodness. I think, and I might have to do another one on this question alone, but in real time, I think the question I would ask myself is, did you do everything you could to help everyone you could? That would be probably the first question that I would ask myself. And in that, I would also want to ask myself, did you continue to grow and face your fears on your journey? Or did you get to a certain place where you became complacent? That would be important to know because I share this a lot, but in my journey over the last 4.5 years, it doesn't really get easier. You just become more prepared. And things are always happening. Life is always happening. There isn't a person you pass on the street that's not carrying a burden right now. And you may never know about it. So, of course, be kind. But understand that, this growth thing doesn't stop. I mean, you can choose to stop it at any point and be where you're at. But I just choose to keep leaning into it. It gives me purpose. Gives me a lot of heartache too, to be honest, a lot of stress. But there's always these little moments that pop up that's like, man, I'm glad I stuck through that. Man, I'm glad I went through that process. And so I've learned to live for those. Next question. This person, I'm not naming any names in this for anonymity purposes, but this person asked, would you ever consider moving back home permanently? This person lives in Virginia, been a good friend of mine for quite some time. It's a great question. I think there's so many factors that play into that. I don't try to overcommit myself to one location, because if God needs me in Virginia, then I'm going to Virginia. If God needs me in Canada, please don't do that to me, God. But if you did, I'd show up. So I try to stay open to those things. There's a part of me that will always be closely tied to Virginia. I've spent more time there recently. That's been fantastic. I intend on continuing to do that with the schools and people and just all the great things that have come from that part of the country. It's been great to redevelop my relationship with it. So I have entertained kind of splitting my life for a little bit, meaning like in Austin or in Virginia, kind of back and forth. It is a thought of mine that's crossed my mind, but as of right now, we're focused on building the Ain't Dead Yet community here in Austin. We're focused on building SCSI Austin here in Austin. And we're focused on helping the youth in Roanoke, Virginia. And I think all those things can be achieved. It takes a lot of effort, but it's worth it. And so, great question. But there's so many factors that play into that. I can't really give you a straightforward answer that is going to be the same in 5 years. Next question. Are you single? So, no, I'm not. I am seeing someone. It's fairly new. New by my standards, new by my brain, but I am not single. So if you slide in the DMs and wonder why you don't get a reply or you get kind of brushed off, now you know. Next question. Ooh, this is a long one. How do you feel connected at church when you've mentioned your stances like gay marriage that are different than what most churches say is right or acceptable? It's also what I struggle with since I have more progressive values. It's a great question. I made a choice a long time ago, and it was right around the time I got to college. So I grew up Southwest Virginia. It's a great place, but keep it all the way real. It's not very diverse. And so when I got to Northeast Ohio, Kent State, which is a predominantly liberal school, it opened my eyes to a lot. And I got to travel to different places. I got to work in different cities throughout my first career and see and meet so many amazing people. And what I learned is, from my perspective, you can be heterosexual and be a great person, or you can be heterosexual and not be a great person. You can be homosexual and be a great person, or you can be homosexual and not be a great person. All of those people, regardless of the sexual orientation, to me, deserve to be loved. And matter of fact, if you're a believer, the Bible states it pretty clearly, we are all loved. And so I choose to kind of look at it that way. But to answer your question about churches, I've left a couple churches because I didn't align with their approach to it. I understand, like, if you're preaching from the Bible, you can't just skip over that part. Like, it's certainly in there. It talks about marriage being between a man and a woman. I think you can teach that without harming others. That's what I believe. I think once it becomes harmful, that's where we start to run into some challenges, or I run into some challenges, because if your ultimate goal is to bring people closer to whatever faith you have or are, if you cast them out right off the bat by saying, like, you're not welcome here, you're not good enough, you believe in this, you do that, you're going to have a hard time getting people on board. Along with that, I struggle with it from like a hypocritical standpoint. Sinners sin. We're all sinners. Like at the end of the day, like however you want to shake that, that's what I believe. We all sin every single day. We hurt people, we hurt places, we hurt things. We do wrong. So who am I to judge someone on their sins? I can't. I can't do that because I'm a sinner myself. Now, do I try to limit my sins, if you will? Yes, of course. But that doesn't mean I'm perfect. So I would never cast someone out because of what the Bible says is a sin. I would just love them and hope that like whatever comes of that, comes of that. But I have no problem going to the pearly gates, if you will. And if God asked me like, hey, how come, you stood up for the gay couple at church? I have no problem answering that question. And I don't think God would look at me and say, you know what, you can't come in. I think he would say, good job. Love thy neighbor. Next. That's what I believe. And it's okay if you believe differently. I still love you too. But that's where I'm at with it. Next question. Can you explain the back tattoo? So if you've been on my social media, I'm sure you've probably seen it, but across my back in big, like California gangster font, it says, ain't dead yet. And I got that, oh boy, I guess it's been about 3 years now, coming up on 3 years. And the reason for the tattoo, the reason for the slogan, it's the name of the podcast, obviously. There was no podcast when that slogan came about. There's really 2 reasons. When I first made my life change, people would ask me all the time, like, why are you pushing so hard? You already ran today. Why are you running again? Why are you going to another meeting? Why are you extending yourself so far? Why are you spreading yourself so thin? And my response to that was because I ain't dead yet. I felt like God saved me the night I got sober. And I made a promise with God in that mirror that I would go all in on everything, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically. And I told God, you take me when you're ready. And so he hasn't taken me yet. And that's where that slogan came from, ain't dead yet. It took on a new meaning after my dad passed away, because in the sobriety community, especially recovery community, addiction community, alcoholism community, suicide community, I mean, all these communities, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, like whatever you want to shake it. A lot of times when people pass away, their story doesn't get told. And that doesn't sit well with me. I understand that it could bring shame or embarrassment or pain. Trust me, I get it. But what if that story saves someone else's son or daughter, her mother or father or brother or sister, aunt, uncle, you get it. And it's a way to keep those people alive. It keeps their spirit alive, keeps their soul alive. My dad's body's no longer here, but his story's alive. And I don't know if it's done it yet, but I believe I tell that part of the story about my dad because it's meant to help somebody someday. And so he ain't dead yet either. So that's what it means to me. The other part of it, the last part of it that I guess I'll explain is a lot of people will say like, well, grammatically, that's not correct. Well, you're correct. That's great. I didn't intend for it to be grammatically correct. I'm a pretty decent speller. I understand, how to use punctuation for the most part. I intentionally put ain't there because where I come from, that's a normal word. Ain't. And I understand it might be a normal word across the rest of the United States, but where I'm from, it is. And again, it was my way to feel connected to that. And so there's a lot wrapped up in it, but the tattoo itself was designed by a good friend of mine. His name's Juan Lopez. He's in New Braunfels, Texas. He's one of the best tattoo artists I've ever seen. He's done a lot of my ink. Pretty much this whole arm was done on 6th Street in Austin. pre-sobriety, by another good friend of mine. His name is actually Ink Weaver. And then this entire arm, for the most part, was done by Juan Lopez in New Braunfels, Texas. And my back and my chest piece was also done in New Braunfels. But I went to him and I was like, hey, I've seen your work on Instagram. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'd like to see. And he's like, all right, man, I got like a 6 or 7 week wait. It was something crazy. And I was like, all right. And I remember waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and going in the day of the tattoo, and he'd done 3 mock-ups. And I remember seeing this one and I was like, bro, that's it. And he's like, all right, are you cool if I like freehand shade? I said, yes. And I was like, how long is this session? Like, what are we looking at? A couple days, whatever. He's like, nah, probably like 10 hours. And if you want, he said, daily rate, we can go straight through. And I said, yeah, I'd like to do that. Didn't know what I was signing up for there, buddy. I've had a lot of artwork done, as you can tell, but you start creeping in past really 5 hours, 6 hours, it starts to get a little weird. But that one took about 10 hours. And I remember vividly, he was probably halfway through and he stopped and he's like, hey man, you told me the whole story of what this tattoo means to you. And he said, it's okay to let that out. And, man, I broke. I had a puddle in the floor. And I must have wept for 2 hours. He just kept tattooing me. But, man, that was one of the first times a man ever told me it was okay to let it out, like let it go. And I'll never forget that, and I'll never forget him for that. So I appreciate you, bro. I love you, Juan. You're the man for that. But, yeah, that was that tattoo means a lot to me. This podcast means a lot to me. And this journey means a lot to me. And to be honest, like there's days, not to get too long-winded on the Ain't Dead Yet slogan, but there's plenty of days I wake up and I don't know how I'm going to keep going. In some seasons, that's more common than not, if I'm being honest. But if you have a good support system, you have good structure, you have good values, you have strong faith, you just got to take one step, and sometimes that step is getting out of the bed. And the next step might be turning on the shower and brushing your teeth and putting clothes on or running shoes. And, but a lot of this journey's been like that for me. It's been hard. And so if you're out there and you're leaning into this constant growth thing, I feel you. It ain't all sunshine and rainbows, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. And, at the end of the day, what gives me peace of mind is leaning into that. So I'm going to continue to do so. Next question. Has your relationship with your mom improved post-sobriety? Absolutely. Absolutely has improved. I don't think there was ever a lack of love. At least not from my perspective. She might feel differently and I'll ask her about it. But I don't feel like she ever loved me less. I don't feel like I ever really loved her less. I just don't think I really knew how to love appropriately before I got sober. And I still don't. Like, again, that's another thing. It's a work in progress. But I would say it's gotten a lot better. We're closer now than we've ever been. And it feels good. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel stressful. It feels nice to not, I've told this story before on the podcast, but my mom worried about me for a long time. And there was a point in my sobriety where she reached out and she's like, the greatest gift you've given me is I can go to sleep at night and not have to worry about the phone ringing and you're in jail or something bad's happened. And that was my mom's way of saying, I'm proud of you. You're doing good. And so I understood it, Mom, and I appreciate you. Appreciate you a lot for that. Next question. Will you ever stop ultra running? My answer to that is yes. I'll just put it this way. We're 4 days out right now from a 100-mile race right outside of Houston. First one of the year. There's 3 100-mile distances scheduled right now. And I've never even finished one 100-mile distance in one calendar year. I've failed at Rocky Raccoon twice, fallen short. And in this journey, when I fall short, my thing is like, I just get back up and I go back to the drawing board and I try again. And so that's why I'm running another one. Honestly, if I would have ran the first one and finished it, I probably would have never done another one. And I don't think God was done teaching me things. I'm learning in this one. I'm 4 days out learning stuff. And I've been trying to do this thing for 3 years. But the biggest reason I would say I'd like to transition to a different type of fitness is it's the time commitment. You know, you're looking at, especially someone who runs at my pace and you're running a mileage-based program, you have to get the miles regardless of the pace, but the pace is determined based on your heart rate. Well, for someone like me to run, 70, 80, 90-mile week, you're creeping up on 20 hours a week of just running. That doesn't include anything else. So it's legit half of a full-time job or a part-time job on top of everything else. And it can become overwhelming, not just for me, but the people around me. And so I'd like to transition into something that's honestly like, I've thrown a couple things around. High rocks. I've thrown around CrossFit. I've thrown around, like the Spartan events look pretty cool. But I've always lifted weights. I've stayed in the weight room the whole time. And so that'll always be a part of my life. And so will running on so many levels. But as far as training and putting my body through that for the rest of my life, I'm not sure that's something I'm interested in. But that is a great question. Next question. Ooh, what was your first sober thought? Oh boy. That's an awesome question. I think, honestly, so there's two types of sobriety in my brain. At least there was for me. There was like sobriety from chemical, which that happens relatively quick, right? Especially if you're on a drug that doesn't have a long half-life or a crazy withdrawal. Alcohol can have some pretty nasty withdrawals, but I honestly like kind of adjusted to them because I think like relapsed every week for 15 years, 17 years and would withdraw or go through withdrawals every Monday for that long too. So to me, it was just a really bad hangover every Monday. It was horrible. And there was obviously other drugs involved with the cocaine, but you would wake up. And so my first like thought after the night I decided to get sober, the first thought the next morning I had, it was just like, here we go. Like it was that simple. I think my first like thought that encapsulated sobriety, not just sober from chemical, but sobriety, was the night, and I've talked about this before too, when I was walking on South Lamar with my dog and the sun was setting, and I'll never forget it. It was, this smile just came over me. It was like I knew everything was going to be okay. And I hadn't smiled like that in years. And so that was I think my first like moment of true sobriety. I'd been sober at that point from chemical, I don't know, close to 6 months, maybe 5, 6 months. So it took some time. And I say that because you hear about this in the rooms a lot. They talk about pink clouds. And like you have these moments where you're like, life's amazing. It's so great. I can't believe I didn't do this sooner. I didn't really have a lot of those early on. So for me, that was like my first pink cloud moment, if you will. And I'll never forget it. Super grateful for it. This person asked, what all drugs have you tried? Well, I'll answer it this way. I've tried, like, of your core big drugs that are talked about most commonly, I've tried everything but heroin. And that might have got slipped in at some point or not, or another, like not to my memory or not to my knowledge, but it could have. And I don't say that because I think I know it's a bad thing. Like heroin is bad, but I don't say it from a judgmental place. Like I'm of the core to the belief that like a heroin addict's the same as somebody with an eating disorder. It's a problem, right? And we're trying to approach these problems and fix them. That's what we're trying to do. So I don't try to rank them on like what level of drug or whatever. So, but that's a great question. Ooh, what was it like transitioning from college to the real world? Uh, Oof, that was rough. That was one of the lowest times of my life because I can't speak for women, but I can speak for men. Identity is really important. And I didn't know who I was. Football was over, academics was over. Now I got to go out in the real world. And I don't have all my teammates to give me therapy sessions in the locker room at the end of the day. You know, I go home to, at that point, an empty house because my mom had my dog. And so trying to figure that out was really tough. So I would tell people if you're coming up on a big transition like that, that you can see or you know that's coming, start preparing literally right now. Start thinking about what you're going to do, how you're going to transition, how you're going to move, how you're going to groove. Because if you get to that point where it happens and you don't have anything in place, a lot of times that's where the bottom falls out. So I would just say, you know, stay aware of that for sure. Next question. I've noticed in your podcast you curse a decent amount. How do you feel this represents you and your faith? It's a great question. It's a really good question. I go back and forth on this one. And to be honest with you, I struggle with it on a few different levels. I talk the way I talk when I'm telling the stories or experiences I've been through because those were the words that were present during those experiences. And I feel like in order to connect with people that are in those moments or those experiences in their life, they can feel me more if they know I can relate. And so I feel like that helps it become more relatable because that's what they're also a lot of times thinking and feeling. But on the other side of that coin, I do think that at some point it would be beneficial to not have this arsenal of curse words, you know, at my side. I think that I'll put it this way. The greatest leader of men that I've ever been around, his name's Daryl Hazel, Kent State, 2011, 2012, head coach, unbelievable man, didn't curse. I heard him curse one time and I'll never forget where we were at West Point. We were playing at Army and he was giving us a pregame speech and he was all fired up. And he usually didn't get juiced up like that, but he was fired up. And I'll never forget, it threw all of us off, man. But he's giving this speech and he's like, we're going to go out there and we're going to kick their ass. And we were like, whoa, dude, like, who's this guy? But it fired us up because we knew for him to go to that level, like he must be somewhere else. You know what I mean? So he was the best leader of men I've ever been around. He didn't feel the need to drop F-bombs and different curse words. He kind of just shot you very straight, very direct. I'm not going to say that his communication was passive at all, which proves the point. You can be very direct, very assertive, even without cursing. It's about the delivery. And so I learned that from him. And I think I would really like to get to a place where I curse less, but it's definitely popped up for me. Let's see here. How much water do you drink a day? I don't know. I try not to track those things. I feel like I track way too much in my life. So if there's something I don't have to track and I can just say I'll drink a lot of it, that would be water. And so I would assume between a gallon and 2 gallons a day, something like that. All right. Last question we're going to do for today's episode. During an endurance event like an ultra marathon or an Ironman, how do you know what to eat and when to eat it? It's a great question. I am certainly not like a subject matter expert in this. And it's because I would say for me, I've got like an iron gut. Like I can eat pretty much anything at any time and it's not going to It's not going to tear me up too bad. At least from like a nausea perspective, it might do some things on the other side, but not the nausea end. And so for me, my rule of thumb with endurance events is kind of just eat. Like, and people are like, well, how often? And I'm like, well, just eat, like keep eating. And so, I've been known to pack some calories in during that Ironman that I did. I gained, oh gosh, what was the number? It was something ridiculous. I think it was like 7 or 8 pounds during the race. So during a 140-mile event, I gained 7 or 8 pounds. So that's fluid, salt, right? Like, I think I ate 23 bananas on the run course. Like, that's always been my rule of thumb. Like, I'd rather overeat and my body eliminate it than not have enough fuel. I understand everybody can't approach it that way because somebody gets upset, then they lose all their fuel. But for ultras, it's a little bit different. I never minded being full on the bike during an Ironman because you're like bent over, you're kind of chilling. And so it wasn't that impactful to me. But running is different because you're bouncing up and down and everything's sloshing around. And so I've kind of had to learn what works for me, especially during ultras. I'm pretty good with gels, lots of fluids, obviously, but like solid foods, pizza, Chick-fil-A, both of those work for me for some weird reason. And I like crackers, which is weird, but like those are really the core pieces for me. And outside of that, it's like caffeine and whatever else is needed to keep moving. Good bit of Advil, if we're being honest. But yeah, I try to just pack in as much as I possibly can. That's my answer. And any good nutrition coach out there that is a coach for endurance events will tell you that that's a horrible approach. That's great. It just works for me. But with all that being said, those were the questions we had. I appreciate the opportunity to answer them. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day or your night, whichever it is and wherever you're at. We look forward to catching up with you soon. And that's going to do it for today's episode on the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. Thanks.